The first thing I noticed was the silence. It was a thick, heavy thing, pressing in on the eardrums, broken only by the soft, rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was a sound I'd come to dread. For 3 months, since the day Mark and I had moved into this sprawling, echo-filled suburban house, that clock had been the metronome to our disintegrating symphony. My name is Chloe Evans. And on that particular, fateful Tuesday evening, the silence felt more profound, more permanent than ever before. Mark, my husband of 7 years, was home. I'd heard the familiar crunch of his tires on the gravel driveway an hour ago, the solid thud of the car door, the jingle of his keys in the lock. But since then, nothing. No cheerful, "Honey, I'm home." No footsteps seeking me out. He'd gone straight to his study, the room that had become his fortress, and closed the door. The message was as clear as the polished glass of our kitchen island: do not disturb. This was our new normal. The passionate, adventurous man I'd married, the one who'd whisked me off to spontaneous road trips and whispered silly jokes in my ear at fancy parties, had been slowly replaced by a stressed, distant stranger. It was his new job, the one he'd said was our golden ticket. The 60-hour weeks, the constant pressure, the endless stream of emails on his phone that glowed in the dark like a digital campfire he was forever tending. We'd traded laughter for logistics, intimacy for income. A deep, aching loneliness settled in my chest. I looked around the kitchen, a space I'd been so excited to design. It was a masterpiece of modern domesticity, gleaming quartz countertops, a professional-grade gas range, a farmhouse sink deep enough to bathe a toddler. It was perfect, and it felt utterly empty. Tonight, I'd decided, would be different. I wasn't going to retreat to the living room with a book and a glass of wine, pretending I was fine with this new arrangement. I was going to fight for us. The weapon of choice. A recipe. Not just any recipe. It was his grandmother's lasagna, a dish scribbled in a shaky hand on a faded, food-stained index card. Nana Rose's famous, heart attack, lasagna, it was called. It was a monster of a meal, involving 3 kinds of cheese, a slow-simmered meat sauce, and homemade pasta sheets. It was the meal she'd made for him every birthday, the meal he'd talked about with tears of nostalgia in his eyes when she passed away. It was a meal that screamed love and home in a way no takeout container ever could. I'd found the card tucked inside an old photo album months ago and had been secretly saving it for a special occasion. This wasn't a celebration, but it felt more important. It was a lifeline. So, I got to work. I tied my long, brown hair back into a messy bun, pulled on my favorite, slightly frayed apron, and put on a playlist of soft, instrumental music, hoping to push back the oppressive silence. I started with the sauce. I browned the ground beef and Italian sausage, the sizzle a welcome, living sound in the quiet house. I chopped onions, crying not just from the vapors but from a well of emotion I'd been holding back for weeks. I added garlic, crushed tomatoes, a generous glug of red wine, and a bouquet of herbs. As the sauce began to bubble and its rich, savory aroma filled the kitchen, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the smell would lure him out. Maybe it would trigger a happy memory, crack the icy shell he'd built around himself. But the study door remained shut. I moved on to the cheese filling, mixing ricotta, parmesan, and shredded mozzarella with an egg and fresh parsley. My hands were sticky with it, a tangible, messy proof of my effort. Then came the pasta. I didn't have a machine, so I rolled the dough by hand, the muscles in my arms and shoulders burning with the effort. Flour dusted the air like snow, coating my apron, the countertops, the floor. The kitchen was a beautiful disaster zone, a testament to my determination. I lost myself in the rhythm of it, the layering of sauce, pasta, cheese, again and again, building something solid and comforting. The afternoon light faded into the deep blue of evening, and I switched on the under-cabinet lights, casting a warm, golden glow over my battlefield. The lasagna was assembled, a towering, cheesy behemoth, ready for the oven. I slid it in, set the timer for 45 minutes, and began the daunting task of cleaning up. This was where I was when it happened. Elbow deep in soapy water, scrubbing a pot crusted with tomato sauce, my back to the kitchen entrance. I was sweaty, disheveled, with a smudge of flour on my cheek and my apron streaked with red. I felt about as far from the polished, put-together wife I sometimes tried to be as was humanly possible. I was just me. Chloe, in her element, creating a mess in the hope of creating connection. The timer on the oven had just ticked over to 20 minutes left when I heard it. The subtle creak of the study door opening. My heart gave a little jump. I kept scrubbing the pot, pretending I hadn't heard, trying to act normal, but every sense was on high alert. I heard his footsteps in the hall. They were slow, hesitant. They paused at the entrance to the kitchen. I could feel his presence, a shift in the atmosphere of the room. The music was still playing, a soft piano piece, but underneath it, the silence between us felt charged, electric. I took a deep breath, put on a small, casual smile, and turned around, ready to say something light like, "Hey, you. Dinner's almost ready." The words died in my throat. I couldn't believe what happened when he saw me in the kitchen. Mark was standing frozen in the doorway, his briefcase still in one hand. But it was his face that stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't the usual mask of tired distraction or polite indifference. It was raw, completely and utterly unguarded. His eyes, a deep, forest green I'd always loved, were wide, shimmering with an emotion I couldn't immediately name. They scanned the room, taking in the flour-dusted counters, the stack of dirty bowls, the simmering pot of sauce on the stove, and finally, they landed on me. His gaze traveled from my flour-streaked hair, down my messy apron, to my soapy hands. And then, a single tear escaped, tracing a slow path down his cheek. My first instinct was panic. Had I done something wrong? Was he angry about the mess? Was he upset about something at work? "Mark," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Honey, what's wrong?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me, his lower lip trembling slightly. He looked like a man who had been lost in a desert and had just stumbled upon an oasis. He looked shattered. He dropped his briefcase. It landed on the tile floor with a dull, heavy thud that made me flinch. He took a slow, unsteady step into the kitchen, then another. "Chloe," he breathed, my name a prayer on his lips. He walked towards me, his movements slow, almost reverent. He stopped just a foot away, close enough for me to see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, the faint stubble on his jaw, the profound exhaustion etched into his features. The air was thick with the scent of garlic, tomatoes, and baking cheese. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling slightly, and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from my forehead. His touch was electric, sending a shiver through my entire body. It had been so long since he'd touched me with anything other than casual habit. "You," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "You're making Nana's lasagna." It wasn't a question, it was a realization, a profound and earth-shattering revelation for him. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He looked around the kitchen again, and this time, I saw what he was seeing. He wasn't seeing a mess. He was seeing the effort. He was seeing the hours of work. He was seeing the love. All this, he gestured vaguely at the chaotic countertops. "You did all this, for me." Another tear fell, and he didn't bother to wipe it away. "I've been such an idiot, Chloe. Such a colossal, blind idiot." He took my hands, ignoring the soapy water, and held them tightly in his. "I've been so buried in that office, in that job, in all the stress. I've been trying to build this perfect life for us, this perfect future. I come home and I'm so tired, so drained, I just shut down. I go into that study and I just disappear." He looked directly into my eyes, his gaze intense, pleading. "And all this time, the life I was trying to build, it was already here. It's been here all along. Right here in this kitchen." His words unlocked something inside me, a dam of resentment, fear, and loneliness that broke all at once. Tears welled in my own eyes, spilling over and mixing with the flour on my cheeks. "I've missed you, Mark," I choked out. "I've missed us. I've missed us, too," he whispered, pulling me into a tight, desperate hug. He buried his face in my neck, and I could feel the dampness of his tears against my skin. He held me like he was afraid I would vanish, like I was the only solid thing in his spinning world. I held him back just as tightly, my hands clutching the fabric of his crisp, white work shirt, now getting damp and soapy. We stood like that for a long time, in the middle of our messy, fragrant kitchen, just holding each other and crying. It wasn't a sad cry. It was a release. It was a cleansing. It was the sound of two people finding their way back to each other after being lost for far too long. Eventually, he pulled back, cupping my face in his hands. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. It transformed his entire face, making him look like the man I'd married. "You have flour," he said softly, wiping my cheek with his thumb, "right here." I laughed, a wet, hiccuping sound. "You have tear tracks," I replied, doing the same for him. The timer on the oven beeped, a cheerful, insistent sound that broke the spell. The lasagna was ready. We pulled apart, and Mark, still looking at me with that wondrous expression, put on the oven mitts and carefully took the bubbling, golden brown masterpiece out of the oven. He set it on the stovetop, and the cheesy, herby, meaty aroma filled the kitchen completely, a smell of pure, unadulterated comfort. "I don't think I can wait for it to cool," he said, his stomach rumbling audibly. "We don't have to," I said, grabbing 2 plates. We served ourselves ridiculously large, sloppy portions, not caring about proper presentation, and sat at the kitchen island on the bar stools, our knees touching. We ate straight from the baking dish, too impatient to let it set. It was messy and glorious. The pasta was tender, the sauce was rich and complex, the cheese was stretchy and decadent. It was, without a doubt, the best thing I had ever tasted. But it wasn't the food. It was the way Mark closed his eyes in bliss with the first bite. It was the way he looked at me between furkfuls, his gaze full of warmth and gratitude and love. It was the way we talked, really talked, for the first time in months. He told me about the immense pressure he was under at the new firm, about a project that was on the verge of failure, about his fear of not being good enough, of not providing enough. He confessed that he felt he had to be perfect, the unshakable provider, and that the weight of that persona was crushing him. And I told him about my loneliness, about feeling like a ghost in my own home, about how much I missed his laugh, his touch, his presence. We didn't solve all our problems that night. We didn't magically fix the stresses of his job or the challenges of life. But we opened a door that had been firmly closed. We remembered that we were a team. After dinner, we cleaned the kitchen together. He washed, I dried, our movements falling into an easy, familiar rhythm. The silence that had felt so oppressive just hours before was now comfortable, companionable, filled with the soft clinking of dishes and the occasional shared smile. Later, as we got ready for bed, he stopped me in the hallway. He took both my hands in his. "Chloe," he said, his voice serious. "I am so sorry. For everything. For checking out. For making you feel alone. I promise you, things are going to change. Starting now. That man who's been living here these past few months. He's fired." I smiled, my heart feeling so full I thought it might burst. "I'm glad to hear it. I really didn't like him very much." He laughed, a real, deep, heartfelt laugh that was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in years. He pulled me close and kissed me, a proper kiss, one that held 7 years of history, 3 months of distance, and a future full of renewed promise. It tasted like garlic, tomatoes, and hope. As we fell asleep that night, curled around each other like we used to, I thought about that moment in the kitchen. The moment he saw me, truly saw me, in all my messy, imperfect, loving glory. I couldn't believe what had happened. I couldn't believe that a simple lasagna, a messy kitchen, and a few honest tears could bridge a chasm that had felt a mile wide. It taught me a powerful lesson. Sometimes, love isn't about grand gestures or perfect words. Sometimes, it's about showing up, getting your hands dirty, and creating something real. It's about being willing to be seen, flour on your face and all, and having the faith that the person who loves you will see not the mess, but the meaning behind it. The chasm wasn't gone overnight, of course. Real life is messier than that, even messier than my kitchen had been. But something fundamental had shifted. The fortress door to Mark's study was now, more often than not, left open. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. The next morning, he didn't rush out the door with a travel mug of coffee and a grunt. He sat at the kitchen island, the very scene of the previous night's transformation, and ate a bowl of cereal while one sipped my tea. The morning sun streamed in, highlighting the now clean counters. "I have a late meeting tonight," he said, his tone cautious, testing the new waters between us. "But it should be done by 7. Maybe, we could watch a movie. That new sci-fi one you've been talking about." It was a simple question, but it was a peace offering, a plan, a commitment. My heart did a little flip. "I'd love that," I said, and I meant it. The day felt different, lighter. I found myself humming as I went about my chores. The silence in the house was no longer a heavy blanket but a comfortable space, because I knew it was temporary. I knew he was coming back to me. When he got home that night, right at 7, he looked tired, but not hollow. He walked into the living room where I was waiting, leaned down, and gave me a soft, lingering kiss. "The project is still a disaster," he confessed, sinking onto the couch beside me. "But you know what? For the first time, I feel like I can handle it. Because I know I'm not handling it alone." We watched the movie, his arm around me, my head on his shoulder. It felt like coming home. We didn't talk much, but the physical connection, the simple act of being together, was a conversation in itself. That weekend, he suggested we go for a hike, something we hadn't done in over a year. We drove out to a state park, the crisp autumn air filling our lungs. As we walked along a trail carpeted with fallen leaves, he reached for my hand. His grip was firm, sure. "I've been thinking," he said, his breath making little clouds in the cool air. "About what you said. About me not being present. I talked to my boss on Friday. Told him I can't keep pulling the 60-hour weeks. It's not sustainable. For me, or for us." I stopped walking, turning to face him. "You did, Mark." What did he say? He wasn't thrilled, Mark admitted with a wry smile. "But he also values my work. We negotiated. I'll be delegating more, and my hours will be a more reasonable 45, 50 max. It might mean a slightly smaller bonus, but," he squeezed my hand. "It's more than worth it." Tears of relief pricked my eyes. This was more than I had dared to hope for. He wasn't just saying things would change, he was taking concrete, difficult steps to make it happen. The changes, once they started, came in a cascade. He started leaving his phone in the study after 7 p.m. He began asking about my day and really listening to the answers. We started a new tradition of cooking dinner together on Sunday nights, a chaotic, fun, collaborative process that usually resulted in another messy kitchen and a lot of laughter. It wasn't always perfect. There were still stressful days, moments of tension, times when old habits tried to reassert themselves. But now, we had a new reference point. We had the lasagna night. When one of us felt the distance growing, we could say, "Remember the lasagna." And it was a shorthand for everything, for the effort, the vulnerability, the forgiveness, the love. One evening, about a month after the kitchen incident, as I'd come to think of it, I was putting away some laundry in our bedroom. I opened Mark's top drawer to put away his socks, and tucked inside, right on top, was the faded, food-stained index card for Nana Rose's lasagna. My breath caught. I picked it up gently. On the back, in Mark's familiar, slanted handwriting, he had written a note. "Chloe's lasagna, October 12th. The night I remembered what really matters. I love you, always." I held the card to my chest, feeling the tears come again, but this time they were pure, unadulterated joy. He'd kept it. He'd framed it, in his own way, as the turning point it was. I couldn't believe what had happened when he saw me in the kitchen that night. I couldn't believe the power of a single, messy, honest moment to change the entire trajectory of a marriage. The kitchen, once a place of lonely silence, had become the heart of our home again, the place where we not only fed our bodies but nourished our souls and rebuilt our love, one messy, beautiful layer at a time.